Now that's still slow, isn't it, that clock?
No, it's just ticked over 2 o'clock on my computer. So,
Correct. That's correct.
I don't want to. I just said I don't want to turn it on.
Well, I now declare the ordinary meeting of council open for 19 January 2021. Welcome councillors and members of the staff that are here, Mr Bonner and Ms Bevilacqua. I acknowledge country. The Glamorgan Spring Bay Council acknowledges the traditional owners of our region and recognises their continuing connection to the land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Now, all councillors are here apart from Mike Simons, who's given his apology. In attendance, Councillor Breeny, Councillor Robinson, Councillor Browning, Councillor Churchill, Councillor Arnold, Deputy Mayor Jenny Woods and myself. Are there any late reports? No late reports. Does anyone have a declaration of interest or conflict? No declarations of interest or conflict. We come on to item 2, confirmation of the minutes. Do I have a motion? Councillor Robinson.
That the minutes of the ordinary meeting of council held on Tuesday the 15th of December 2020 at 2 p.m. be confirmed as a true and correct record.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Arnold. Any discussion? All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Item 2.2. There is a report of the date and purposes of workshops held. There was a workshop held on the 12th of January. The report's in the notice of meeting and agenda. Can I have a motion?
Yes, I'll move that council notes this information.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Woods. Seconder, Councillor Breeny. Any discussion? All those in favour? Against? I declare the motion carried unanimously. Now, public question time. Are there any questions without notice? None? So we go on to item 3.2. I note there are responses to previous questions without notice. Without notice taken on notice, 15 December 20. The questions and the answers are set forth in the notice of meeting and agenda. Item 3.3, questions on notice. There are some questions on notice as set forth in the notice of meeting and agenda, and the responses from our General Manager are set forth there. Item 3.4, responses to previous questions on notice, 15 December. The questions are there and the responses from our General Manager are set forth in the notice of meeting and agenda. Item 4, this is the Planning Authority section under Regulation 25 of the Local Government Meetings and Procedure Regulations. I declare that the Council is now acting as a planning authority under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993 for Section 4 of the agenda. Can I have a motion? Councillor Arnold, thank you.
Thank you,
Seconder.
Mayor. I'll move that council now acts as the planning authority at 2:05 p.m.
Thank you very much. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Robinson. I put the motion. All those in favour? Against? I declare it's carried unanimously. As a planning authority, item 4.1, development application. This is probably 80 Burgess Street, Bicheno. Do I have a motion? Councillor Bruni?
Thank you, Mayor. I move that pursuant to Section 57 of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993 and the Glamorgan Spring Bay Interim Planning Scheme 2015, Development Application 2020/163, to construct 12 two-storey buildings housing 14 visitor accommodation units and 7 camper van sites at 80 Burgess Street, Bicheno, CT 134465/50, be approved subject to the following conditions listed 1 through to 26 and the advice provided A through to M.
Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Do you wish to speak to the motion, Councillor Bruni?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. First thing I would like to say is that the report provided with this application was considering the discretionary requirements listed at 12 on page 22, front setback, appearance, passive surveillance, surface treatment of access and parking areas, landscaping in car park areas and stormwater management were very well set out and were very easy for me to understand, from an engineering point of view at least. And I think one of the clear things is that this zoning, being a local business zone, applies in cases where such developments as usually take place in a business zone require frontage to a main road or a high street or something like that, with a shop frontage, with required car parking, with, complying to all of the sorts of things that you would assume in a shopping area or a business area, whatever type of business it might be. And because this is located where it is, basically at the end of a dead-end street, which could be argued is not necessarily the main street of Bicheno where this is located. The Tasman Highway actually is Burgess Street for quite a while, but then takes a turn, and some of the major businesses, including the one supermarket in town, is not located necessarily fronting Burgess Street. And so all of the conditions that were subject to performance criteria seem to be aimed towards compliance with the planning scheme for businesses that, as I said, fronted on a standard commercial main street, if you like. This is a very different development. I must say that given where it's located and the fact that it means demolishing the existing system, it would be, I would say, for the community of Bicheno, a pleasant surprise to see something new go there and something active go there, because it's been sitting as it is for quite some time in a manner which some people would say looked like a bit of a lost cause. To have it developed in this way, I think, is a positive for Bicheno, and considering that I've been reassured that the performance criteria as far as all of those issues that I mentioned before, the setback, appearance, passive surveillance, etc., have been satisfied or are in compliance with the performance criteria of the planning scheme, I think that is worthy of my support. One issue that has that has concerned me is the fact that I'm a little concerned about conditions that have been placed or maybe that need to be looked at in relation to the protection of the penguins. For those of us who follow bird life, tomorrow is Australian Penguin Awareness Day, and given that this site is a known nesting area for penguins and that a report was provided with this application by Dr. Waller, who is a renowned birder representing BirdLife Tasmania, I think means that we were given fair reassurance that all the requirements that would be needed to protect the penguins have been taken into account in this development. However, I was wondering whether it would be possible in the conditions listed to include some form of verification that during this phase of, well, construction, I presume, that somebody be allocated, or some way we allocate some position to ensure that the conditions as per the guidelines of Dr. Waller given in condition, I think it's condition 15, sorry, condition 15 on page 31, that somebody be allocated the responsibility of monitoring and reporting to council the progress of the protection of these penguins. And I'm just wondering whether or not a condition of that nature could be included. Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to speak? Seconder or anyone else?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'd just like to concur with Councillor Breeny's comments there. I was pleased to see that most of the environmental issues have been addressed in the planning report. But like Councillor Breeny, I had just a note here against that point 15 on page 31, and I think that would be a good idea because on lots of occasions with planning reports we require things and we have conditions, and the little penguins clearly nest there at the moment where the old Silver Sands resort is. So it'd be nice to know that that guideline and that condition number 15 in particular was going to be adhered to. Otherwise, I think it's it's a fantastic opportunity for Bicheno to have a development such as this on that site, and with tourism booming, particularly in Bicheno, I think it's only going to add to the facilities that they already have there.
Anyone else wish to speak? Yes,
Thank
Deputy
you.
Mayor.
I just have a question, if I may, Mayor, through you to the planners that we have here. On page 30, use and amenity, 5, the rooms must be used for visitor accommodation, it should be accommodation, must not be occupied by the same person or persons for a period exceeding 3 months within any 12-month period and cannot be occupied as residents. Why would it be 3 months? Would it be better so that its continued use by various people be taken down to a 4-week period in that regard, instead of it being 6 months, or 3 months, sorry?
Are you saying, Deputy Mayor, that you feel the occupancy provision is a little long?
Is a little, in my opinion, and if we can sort of address that to the planners.
Does anyone else, before the planners answer the question, have anything else to say? Before the planners answer the question, can I ask our General Manager, do we have an inspector who could inspect to see that the condition 15 on page 31 is adhered to by the developer if this motion is passed?
Through you, Mr. Chair, can I just at this opportunity just welcome Dr. Nikki Meeson to the room. Nikki is our biodiversity officer, and a birder like me, albeit a much better one. I'm sure that, well, there's two matters is that all the matters now that have been raised? So it's the occupancy duration and the penguin, protection of the penguin habitat. Maybe while we have got Nikki here, we can just talk about the penguin habitat, and we'll get back to the occupancy, if that's all right. So in that condition 15, Nikki and James or Robin, if you want to comment, in that condition 15, which is the report done by Eric Waller, all pre-construction, during construction and post-construction activities must adhere to the guidelines for construction activities at Silver Sands to minimise disturbance to nesting little penguins on site and in the adjacent coastal reserve. That report was done in July 2016. I presume it would still be applicable. I'll stand corrected on that. But yeah, so the question is, can we appoint someone? And I would probably suggest that it would be someone in the community with some knowledge and perhaps a membership of this group that we could ask the developer to appoint to monitor the site during and post-construction.
I didn't quite follow that. Ask whom to appoint?
The developer to appoint a person from the, what was the body you mentioned, Councillor Brini? The Penguin Board?
Tasmanian Penguin Action Group. Advisory Group.
Them.
Thank you.
Them. Would it be appropriate to appoint them as a body or not?
I think it would be appropriate, but I doubt whether they would have the resources to be able to do it. I'm thinking that perhaps somebody that's on staff of the construction company can be perhaps trained by the Penguin Advisory Group to kind of fulfil the requirements of the guidelines. I don't think they would necessarily need an expert on site if they had somebody who's trained to do it, like one of the staff at the construction company, possibly. And as long as, I mean, the guidelines are quite clear. They were written in 2016, but I think they're probably still, I don't see any reason why they shouldn't still be applicable.
Okay, so we can, yeah, okay, so can we take that on board then, James, and approach the developer in that regard? Or is it a,
They'd be trained by, say, somebody from the Penguin Advisory Group or Parks and Wildlife Service?
Yeah, I'm just in the process of trying to draft a condition in my head if we need to be this resolved straight away.
James, can I ask something before you go to the effort of drafting a condition? If clause 15 was enforced, that condition would be sufficient, would it not? And this is a question. Would it not to enable the development to go ahead without this extra condition, because clause 15 necessarily encompasses a compliance? Is that I've got to ask James the question, then Councillor Bruni, or do you want to answer?
Excuse me, Mayor, in support of your question and to support James's answer,
Yeah.
I'm wondering if rather than, as I stated in my statement on the development application, rather than having a condition per se, it may be added as an advice to that condition, whether or not that is a more realistic option.
Well, it's all a question of enforcement. If you want to amend your motion, I suppose that would be in order if the council agrees and the seconder agrees to that amendment. If it'll be of use, because there's no point having a condition that can't be enforced.
Okay. So Nikki's already drafted up, I suppose. I've got a bit of a written way we could adjust condition 15. And reading, a person must be appointed to be responsible for ensuring that all pre-construction, during construction and construction activities are adhered to according to the guidelines for construction activities at Silver Sands, and then the second part would be this person must provide a monthly report to council's general manager.
Or a step.
Can I ask for a bit more specificity? Would it be a good idea to say whom it ought to be the obligation to appoint? In other words, should it be the developer? The developer must appoint?
Appropriately trained person.
Yeah, so, well, I would put that it's a condition for the developer to provide the person, but we can clarify that and say the developer must appoint a person who is been suitably trained.
That would seem to cover it in my
Or
ignorant
suitably qualified or?
Suitably qualified or experienced trained. The difficulty suitably qualified can be, well, what is that? Suitably trained is the same.
Trained to monitor adherence to the guidelines or.
Yeah, so it's, this one is probably putting a bit more emphasis, because rather than just saying to comply, we actually are saying that a person must be overseeing it, and they are to provide a report to the general manager. Now, it could be monthly, or we could say it at each stage of the development. And that puts a little bit more onus onto them to say that we want to see how they're going through the process, not just at the end.
So you feel that regular reporting might result in more adherence?
It does drag their attention towards it, and it allows us more opportunity during the process. If we think there's an issue, and we can take action then, rather than they've done the demolition stage and they're onto construction, we say, well, hang on, you didn't follow it during demolition, but we've already passed that.
Where's the report?
So you can get a better idea of how things are progressing with a monthly report, let's say a monthly report, an updated monthly report.
Mover and seconder, would you be content with such an amendment?
Absolutely. Yes. Yep.
So you better get
We need the wording of it, that's for sure,
Yes.
before we can actually agree to it. But if we could have the wording of that
something.
organised, that'd be great.
I was just going to say to you, Mr. Mayor, there needs to be a pre-construction start as well. So certainly there'll be reporting will be during the construction and post, but before anyone starts any work on site, this person that we're talking about needs to do an assessment of the site before the first sod is turned to use another term, or before they start demolition.
So
Someone
we
needs.
know what's there to start with.
Guidelines that-
Correct. So there's a starting position that we can at least say we assessed, the site was assessed before any work began. I think that's in Dr. Wooler's guidelines anyway.
Yes.
Sorry,
I just wanted to say that I think condition 15 needs to stay, because it's
Yes.
the condition that says, yes, yeah, you must adhere to these guidelines, and then
And that.
not as a modification of that, but another.
Correct.
Yes.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Well, I'll let the mover and seconder work out the wording together with our planner's advice. You've got the job ahead of you.
2 months. Bi-monthly.
Yeah.
So we can come back to the meeting if you want.
See how long it'll take, just to wait and see. We haven't got much more on the agenda.
Just the financials
Yeah.
and the delegations. The disclosure. Oh yeah, and the adoption of the infrastructure, stormwater infrastructure.
If I could address the issue of the amended conditions.
Additional, isn't it?
This would then require the conditions numbering to be altered dramatically through. If it was added at condition number 16, unless we can incorporate it into condition 15.
So you, Mr Mayor, I would suggest doing a 15A and a 15B.
A 15A and a 15B is agreeable, thank you. I would need guidance on the rewording, but I think if I was to pass this to the person taking the minutes, and we can discuss any minor changes to this. Thank you. A little bit messy, Mayor. I apologise for this, but I think it's worthy of it. One of the reasons why it's worthy is that I've read very carefully the report by Eric Waller. Certain conditions that definitely need to be taken into account are very important from a penguin habitat and perseverance point of view. In particular, lighting, which, although it is mentioned briefly in the report, Dr. Waller, in his report on section 4.1, refers directly to nocturnal illumination, which he insists must, I think is the word he used. Even if it isn't, he's very adamant about it. It must be infrared, the infrared end of the spectrum in car parks, walks, etc. And also states, and I'll read, all white light sources such as torches, flashes, or on smartphones, tablets, etc., must be prohibited at all times outside accommodation and other buildings after sunset throughout the year.
What's wrong with that one?
Pretty dramatic, but it is a standard issue, because if penguins are disturbed by white light, which they are directly every time, it affects directly their nesting. And this is a prime penguin habitat in a town that relies primarily on tourism, and most of that is based on penguins.
Can I raise there as a grammatical problem in part of
The
it?
person must be.
Yes, that's correct.
Just, she's
That's
just
right.
typing.
Keep going.
Eon provide, that's all.
A suitably qualified person?
Oh, I don't know, we could put that in there from a practical point of view, because what is a suitably qualified person and how do you enforce
A
it?
suitably knowledgeable person?
Suitably trained?
How do you enforce that? If the report's no good, what's the sanction? Oh, I'm sorry, a question arises to me that if the report for item 1 at the beginning is no good, what's the sanction?
There must be fines or something, isn't there?
Yeah, get rid of that.
person must be appointed to be responsible.
Be appointed by who though?
Well, that's a question I did ask, but
Is it appointed by the developer?
By the construction company, I would think, or developer.
By the developer.
by the developer, it seems logical, because they're the people who get the permit.
And approved by the general manager, would that be appropriate?
Well, then again, you get into an argument, don't you, as to what,
It's either approved or not approved by the general manager, no argument.
Not with the developer though.
well, yeah, no, well, I won't say anything, if you put it in there.
Suitably trained or
But what, as has been said before, what is a suitable training?
Must have just suitably knowledgeable.
Yeah.
That's what I've got up there.
It would have to be overseen by a suitably qualified person, but the person doing it,
By the developer.
suitably trained, like
Suit-
environmental consultants.
Well, then, where do you find one?
Well,
It's up to them.
that is the question of what level you go to. That is it difficult to find a suitably qualified environmental consultant. So when you're talking about a consultant, we've now moved from someone who's been trained to actually, like a university qualified or something like that, which is obviously a higher bar. And whether we think that's necessary, or whether we just need someone who's following the guidelines and is reporting to us how they're following the guidelines. If they're not following the guidelines, we would then go back to condition 15 that says they need to comply with the guidelines. It does require a level of compliance for council to monitor it. If we're going to ask for reports, we need to monitor it. There's obviously a work time issue to do that, but
I think too, we might be going outside of what the planning scheme lets us do by stipulating that this particular person must report on this issue, because if there's no biodiversity overlay on the site, we're proceeding this way because we know about the penguins, but there's no actual biodiversity overlay, meaning it doesn't have to meet the code.
I ask a question, and it's not my job to really pass an opinion, but if the condition was there, how much legal argument you're going to get? Look at the proposal, and I have looked at it in the past. Part of it depends upon penguins being there, and I note from the actual workshop detail that the size of the construction area is going to be, the things being constructed, is far less than the existing mess that's up there. So it's a difficult grey area. I'm content to accept it in that form. And we'll take our chances on compliance, especially seeing the developer wants penguins there.
Mayor,
Oh,
if
sorry.
I may.
Could I
Sorry,
just-
Yes.
sorry.
Sorry, can I just ask a question probably of councillor Bruni? Is why doesn't the original condition 15 actually cover what you're trying to do in part B? And bearing in mind what Ms Bevilacqua just said about the legality of it, if you like, in relation to no biodiversity. And my view is that condition 15, as it originally sat, covered what we're trying to protect.
It's an excellent question, actually. I'm just overly concerned that in the conditions with, for example, all pre-construction, during construction, post-construction activities must adhere to the guidelines. We have no way of measuring that or monitoring that. And to be able to have some way of assessing compliance will avoid the answer being, the situation arising where it's too late, they've done it wrong, the penguins are compromised.
But if I'm
Yes,
may,
please, go ahead.
If we put in another condition that may not have, for want of a better word, some planning teeth, and it was to go to appeal, what does that then do to our, to the approval? I mean, because my understanding is, I mean, the developer could appeal the conditions, couldn't they? Yeah. Yeah.
They could.
I think
Specifying must be suitably qualified, pushing the developer a little bit too far.
Pushing the boundaries a little bit too far.
Just add monitor and report into
You
this
need
one.
to
Into
stop the
15.
chat.
I was thinking.
Stop the chat.
Well, point of order.
Point of order, yes. Point of order, sorry, Mayor. The reason why I call it point of order, we can't have all this chat going on because it's not conducive to a meeting. Maybe at the end of that, at the end of condition 15, like there has been in the above 14, to the satisfaction of the general manager, like a report to the satisfaction of the general manager, may be a way of just adding that so that it actually still comes, we're still keeping an eye on it, because 15 says all that it needs to say without adding that, but then we're still keeping an eye on it because the general manager's got to be satisfied that that's actually taking place. So if you add the wording to the satisfaction of the council's general manager, would that cover it?
In item B, you mean, or item A?
No, get rid of item B, just have item 15.
What do the mover and seconder have to say to that proposition?
That is there already.
No, it's
Sounds,
not. Not in this one, it isn't.
Mayor, my response to that is, sounds like a solution to a complicated problem. Thanks.
Seconder?
Through you, Mayor, yeah, maybe as Councillor Woods has said there, at the end of 15 you could have something like a bi-monthly report to the General Manager in relation to adherence to this clause will be undertaken. Something like that, and that's along the lines of what Councillor Woods is saying. So they just we're not saying who, we're just saying that we want a progress report.
General Manager, you've got a view. What would you like to
I
hear?
just think I take on board what Councillor Bruni raised initially, and also the planner's advice around the technicality of a lack of a biodiversity layer, but I don't think that should, so legally, yes, the developer would have recourse, but I don't think that should stop us as a council showing that we are placing some importance on the penguin habitat, and I think what we're discussing here would do that as an addition to whatever way it comes out, as an addition to condition 15. I'm surprised that there is no, given the penguin importance, I'm surprised there is no biodiversity layer, but that's a discussion for another day, and that's a higher planning matter. Certainly, if there was a biodiversity layer when this application was originally considered, that would have triggered, possibly would have triggered engagement with the penguin groups and all the other bodies, but it lacking, obviously it didn't. I think we would be doing well just to have something in there along those lines that shows that we are taking ownership of this, in spite of the fact that it's not covered by a biodiversity layer.
Mover and seconder, are you content with item 15 to the satisfaction of the Council's General Manager to be put at the end of item or condition 15?
Which is similar to the last line in condition 14.
It seems to me legally that's in order, if you're content for your motion.
Thank you, Mayor. I would ask, through you, Mayor, if the biodiversity officer and the planners are happy with that, if they feel as though that's going to give them enough input through the General Manager to ensure that those conditions are adhered to, then I'm quite happy with that.
Did that include the bi-monthly report of the 2
No, it hasn't at the moment, and I'm wondering if that might be worthy of an inclusion.
Yeah, I think to
Excuse
help.
me, we We need to go through the mayor when we're discussing, sorry.
Sorry.
Well, the general manager could say what he's satisfied with in advance, a report of this event, that event and some other event. That might attend to the matter, it gives him a wider scope.
Or could I suggest the word with regular reporting to the satisfaction of the general manager?
That would be an order, it would seem to me. Are you content with that, councillor Robinson?
Through you, Mayor, yeah, I just think something a bit more certain would be better. I think if they know, the developer knows they've got to do a bi-monthly report, or it's, it's every 60 days.
Is that
it's
a yes?
Sorry?
Is that a yes?
Well,
Are
I
you
think
happy with the amended?
I'm happy but I would like to see bi-monthly
Okay.
report in there
So
instead
it'd
of
be
regular.
with bi-monthly reporting rather than regular, or regular bi-monthly, just bi-monthly.
Bi-monthly is satisfactory to me.
Now, I think we've got a motion before us to amend condition 15 in the proposal by inserting the words with bi-monthly reporting to the satisfaction of council's general manager to be added in.
Could I ask that with bi-monthly reporting on compliance to the
Well, it's got to be compliance, hasn't it? It can't be on anything else.
reporting, yeah, okay.
So are the mover and seconder content with that amendment to the
Absolutely.
motion?
Yes.
Is there any discussion further? Ah, yes, Mr Churchill.
I would just like to ask about the commencing date, which should be easily put in a couple of words if you wanted to include that, and that could be put in to commence prior to the demolition of the existing building.
So it'd be with bi-monthly reporting, commencing on the, prior to demolition, commencing prior to demolition, comma, to the satisfaction. So bi-monthly reporting commencing prior to any demolition, comma, to the satisfaction of the general manager. Would that satisfy the mover and seconder? And councillor Churchill?
Oh, it's not my call, but I'm happy with it if the mover and seconder are.
Feeling,
Mover and seconder, are you happy?
feeling so pedantic, I'm sorry. Rather than referring to demolition, I would have thought any works
Fine.
being
Oh,
undertaken.
yeah, well, any works?
Prior to
Yeah.
the-
I think through you, Mr Mayor, the councillor Churchill's point is a good one, because the guidelines in Woolers, the 2016 talks about pre-construction, construction and post-construction.
Yeah, not
The demolition is a
pre-construction.
major part of this job, a significant part of this job, and I hope the developer's done their numbers on what the demolition's going to cost. But yeah, it has potential, as much if not more potential, to impact on habitat than the actual construction of the pods. So I think that's a good point, and it needs to be in
So
there.
demolition remain, perhaps? Mover and seconder?
Yes.
Seconder?
Through you, Mayor, I think we've got stages here. The demolition's not going to be the first thing they do. They're going to get in there and do assessment. They might be moving turf around and bits and pieces before they actually start demolition. So before any works, I think, any works are undertaken's a better thing than demolition, because demolition is not necessarily the very first thing they do. They're
Well,
not
is
just
that
going to.
works, including demolition?
Any works, including demolition, yeah, because
Yes.
they'll get around it. If you don't mention
Any works.
demolition, they'll get
Yes.
around it by
Yeah.
saying we're not building yet,
Any works,
Any works.
Yeah.
including demolition.
including demolition.
Yeah.
That's fine.
My apologies to the minute taker.
I think you've done it correctly.
No pressure, Chair.
Any further questions?
Just remember to go
Any
through
further
the
discussion?
Councillor Breen.
On that one?
Yes, on condition 15. Amendment to condition 15. All those in favour,
No.
please? I'm sorry.
Put it.
Sorry, Mayor. I did ask a question about the accommodation rooms.
Yeah.
Point 5 of the,
Oh, yes, you did. And we haven't got an answer from our planners, have
no,
we?
no, not just yet. Yes.
Did you have a preferred?
Oh, well, I did have a preferred, wording, as in 4 weeks, and within a 6-month period instead of a 12-month period. So shortening both of the times that they can, because the actual and I know I'm aware Councillor Arnold brought this up, but the actual wording of the condition doesn't read very well. Like it reads, the rooms must be used for visitor accommodation, must not be occupied.
That should be
So there's a
should
lot,
be
and not be occupied by the same person or persons for a period exceeding 3 months within a 12-month period and cannot be occupied as residents. I'd like to see that 3-month period be 4 weeks. That's my thoughts on it.
Do you want to move a motion to that extent? Or do you
No,
want
I
to
just
ask
want to
further
just-
questions
no,
about it?
No, I don't want to move a motion. I just was wondering if that could be reduced to 4 weeks instead of the 3 months.
Councillor Arnold.
Well, just following on from the Deputy Mayor, I guess I'd like to know from the planners, if I may, why 3 months? Because I think it should be shortened.
So
I agree with the Deputy
So
Mayor.
that's
in
a
that
further
respect.
question to the planners?
So, yeah, but I mean, why did they choose 3 months? And why couldn't we have it as 4 weeks?
My understanding, it's a standard condition of ours. Now, if that needs to be changed, that's fine, and we can look into how other councils do it. There's no reason why we can't reduce it to a reasonable level. 12-month period is a normal thing, you know, that you would do it over a 12-month period. I've seen it different ways where you have maximum occupancy for, you can't do any more than so many consecutive days within a 12-month period. There's a lot of variable ways, so there's no reason why we couldn't change it. I can see, unless Robin has other opinion, down to 4 weeks.
Councillor Bruni, I saw your hand rise. Did you have other questions of the planner about this particular condition?
No, Mayor, I'm just concerned that I need to be convinced that this condition isn't reasonable.
I must admit, I adhere to your view on that. Councillor Robinson.
Through you, Mayor. Yeah, I have a concern with that change of condition, in that would mean that someone can't stay there for 2 weeks in January and then decide to stay for 3 weeks in December. Is that right? So I think that, I don't know that's a fair thing, really.
That's,
Councillor Arnold.
if I may, Mayor, that's not how I'm reading it. I'm reading that it's a consecutive 3-month period. Isn't that what it means? For a period exceeding 3 months? Are we talking about a consecutive 3-month period, or are we talking about?
It would be a consecutive period, and we could always clarify that, so
yeah.
that it is
And-
consecutive days.
And my thoughts around this, and I've raised this many times before in council, the issue that I have with this is council's inability to actually police that condition. I mean, we can put that condition on all we like, but we don't have the ability or the resources to actually police it. So,
I'd like to say something if everyone's had their say. It's a question of how far we should intrude into the commercial operation of the developer and the project manager. And provided it's not used, or part or some of it's not used as a permanent residence, it seems to me that ought to be our limit to interfering and to impose restrictive conditions, because we thought it was a good idea at the time, if the proviso that it can't be used as permanent residence, it can't be used by permanent residents, ought to be sufficient, it seems to me, but it's a matter of opinion. And Councillor Bruni.
Thank you, Mayor. My concern, similar. I would prefer to find out where the planning scheme comes into play here. Is there a requirement in the planning scheme? I understand there would be for visitor accommodation not to be permanent residents, but that is all that we could be enforcing anyway, isn't it? But regardless of how we word it, we are simply complying with the planning scheme in approving this as a planning authority if we comply with the conditions of the planning scheme. And those conditions are the conditions that we should think about, other than our council's group preference with regard to how people utilise visitor accommodation in this municipality. Is there a condition in the planning scheme that covers condition 5?
That tests the planners' knowledge of the scheme.
There's no,
It-
through the mayor, there's no actual restriction nominated in the planning scheme.
Is there a restriction, Robin, saying thou shalt use this as visitor accommodation only, or something along those lines?
Yes.
It can be, yes.
No, in the scheme.
The scheme doesn't specify the conditions.
So it doesn't enable council to approve visitor accommodation only as opposed to residential accommodation permanently. It's a question.
Yes, it's a different use. So it's either residential or visitor.
Can I ask both planners, if we impose a condition putting a time limit on it, do we run the risk, it might not be a great risk, but a remote risk, that the matter will end up on appeal to knock that portion of the condition out, namely that we've decided what is a visitor accommodation term as opposed to a residential, permanent residential term? I have seen appeals based on those sort of things. I'd ask the question. I don't have an opinion.
Mr. Mayor, could I offer a suggestion?
Yes, please.
Would the clause work if we said the rooms must be used for visitor accommodation and cannot be occupied at any time as a permanent residence? Because I'm thinking if we put a restriction of, say, 4 weeks in any 12-month period, it's, as someone said, you know, like that might restrict somebody going to holiday for 4 weeks because, I mean, let's face it, there are people that go and stay for extended periods in holiday resorts or whatever. So whether they, you know, want to pay to be there for 1 month or 1 day or 3 months. But if we make it clear that the property cannot be turned into permanent residence, it has to remain as visitor accommodation. That might
Well,
be, it might be a solution.
So, Councillor Arnold, you're foreshadowing perhaps?
No,
That
I'm not foreshadowing, I'm
okay.
just offering it for discussion, Mr Mayor.
Yes.
Because
Is there
it
any
gets too
comment on that
confusing.
very sensible suggestion?
So through you, Mr Mayor, if taking on board Councillor Arnold's suggestion, then that would circumvent the need to put a timeline on it, because if the planning scheme clearly defines what's visitor accommodation and what's permanent accommodation, you don't need to do that.
That's right.
That was where that's my thoughts. It might need to be just worded just a wee bit differently, but I mean, it's very simple. It must be visitor accommodation. It can't be permanent residences.
Delete part of the phrases in the
Just
middle of the condition.
delete the bit that says and must not be occupied by the same person for a period exceeding 3 months with any.
Is there a feeling among councillors, or do you want to deal with it formally?
That's a good idea.
As mover, I consider that to be quite acceptable. It seems that means that we are complying with the planning scheme, the zonings. That is, visitor accommodation is permitted but residence is not, and therefore we're complying with the requirement of the planning scheme, and we're not necessarily placing ourselves in a situation where we have to defend timing and allowances. So that I'm happy for my motion to be, for that condition to be amended.
And if I may, Mayor,
Yes.
it also doesn't restrict the business owner from having somebody make a booking for 3 months, or, 3 months in January to March, and then coming back in September or whatever for 3 months. They're only there in holiday mode. That-
Yes, councillor Browning.
Through the Mayor, and my thing with it as well is if you make a stipulation on this sort of development, does it mean that every other visitor accommodation is going to have to be,
Yeah.
So I think it's a good idea to change it to that.
So, does anyone dissent?
Through you,
Yes,
Mayor.
yeah,
No, I'm not
Councillor
dissenting.
Ramsden.
I just
You're the seconder.
I can actually just sense that our planners would like to say something.
My difficulty is I'm too new to Tasmania to be fully over the system. I do think there's merit in putting a time frame in there. I appreciate councillors' concerns. Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor. While it can end up being a compliance issue, it does clearly state that council expects this to be a visitor accommodation. That's what its purpose, that's what it was applied for, that's its purpose. It is not to be used for a place of residence. And I think putting a condition in 3 months is, while it's a long time, it's a reasonable time that you would expect the visitor to stay longer than 3 months. So
Good. Go on.
I'm obviously, follow the council direction. I do think it can be helpful to have a time limit in there,
Is it,
and it is consistent with this.
yes,
It is consistent with our practice so far of putting timeframes in. We have a lot of visitor accommodation, not like this. Normally it's Airbnb type things, but it is a consistent approach.
would the word permanent residences do the job? I just don't like putting a limit on a fellow running a business or a lady running a business saying how long your visitors can stay.
And just in line with that, Mayor, if I can, we also have to think about other, as you say, visitor accommodation in the area, places like Sapphire, Freycinet Lodge. Can people stay there for more than 3 months? No, but there are some very, very, very wealthy people that go to Sapphire and those places. So is there a restraint on them? And then we've just got to be careful, I think, that we don't set some sort of precedent by saying a time frame.
Councillor Browning.
Can I just add that I would only be happy with any time limitation if I was aware that every single visitor accommodation was required to comply with exactly the same requirement.
So
If
is
there
it
was
correct,
any change, then definitely I would not be happy to support it.
Councillor Browning, is it correct to say that you would be happy with condition 5 to read the rooms must be used as visitor accommodation and must not be, and cannot be used as permanent residences, and just leave it at that? Would you be happy with that? Does that cover the concerns that people have?
Yes, I'd be, through you, Mayor,
You're-
I'd be
In
happy with
the
that.
advice of the planners?
Your question to me was, would I be happy with that?
Yes.
I would be happy with that if my advice from my qualified planners was in agreement.
And if it was not, because they have put it in 3 months, they wouldn't have done it lightly.
I would only be satisfied if I was assured that the planners could verify that every visitor accommodation that goes through this planning authority had the same limitation placed on it. Is that the case?
Through the Mayor.
Yes, yes, please.
There is a situation where that is not included in a permit, and that is only the situation where it is located in a zone that can be for a no permit required use. For example, general residential zone, residential is a no permit required use. So if we approve a visitor accommodation in the general residential zone, we can put in a condition that says it can be used interchangeably for residential purposes or visitor accommodation use. But in every other zone, that condition goes in, restricting the visitor accommodation use to a maximum of 3 months in any 12-month period.
In that case, I'm quite happy to leave the condition exactly as it is.
Are there any other
Yes.
matters to raise? Councillor
Through
Robinson.
you, Mayor, yeah, if it says for a period exceeding 3 months, do we mean consecutive, 3 months consecutive? Well, I think if we're going to have that, it should say that, because for a period exceeding 3 months doesn't necessarily mean they're consecutive. Grammatically, I mean, it could mean a month here, 2 months here. So if you're going to, if people are going to agree to stick to that, it should say exceeding 3 consecutive months.
That's a comment, it's not... what effect does it have on your seconding of the motion? Anything?
I'm still considering my position.
Shall we adjourn and get on to the next matter while you cogitate upon it, after Councillor Breeny's had his say?
Could I just say that, Mayor, my concern with that issue is that if somebody wanted to flout the system, whatever it is. Flout the system. I thought it was flaunt it one day, but flout would be the word. Then they could occupy the building, if it was supposedly consecutive, they could occupy the building for 3 months, move away for a day and then move in again. So I think we need to be very careful how we say it and what we say.
And the question is, how far do we go to? And that's always a problem. Councillor Arnold.
Well, Mr Mayor, I'm aware that I've spoken 2 or 3 times on this matter already, but for the purposes of debate, it strikes me that if we have, going back to the original suggestion I made, the rooms must be used for visitor accommodation and cannot be occupied as permanent residences. If we were to go back to that, then that would give us greater power of policing, because they can't be used as permanent residences under the zoning. So doesn't that strengthen our policing of this particular condition? I mean, we can't police, we don't have the resources to police whether someone's been staying in there for 3 months and go away for a day and come back for 3 months. We just can't police that. We don't have the resources. However, we could police the zoning if it became obvious that someone was living in one of these units permanently. So I think by taking out the time limit, it strengthens our ability to police that particular condition.
I think, through the Mayor, that once we got into a situation where we thought somebody might be living in a place permanently, at what point does something become permanent? Is it at 3 months? Is it at 6 months? Is it at 12 months?
Legally, as a retired lawyer of 7 years ago, only 49 years in the game, it's a matter of judgment. And goodness knows, one magistrate might do this and another magistrate might do that. It's a matter of judgment.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I don't know if it is a matter of judgment. If those timelines have come out of the
Past practice.
come out of the regulations or the scheme, then it's not a matter of judgment. That's what it is. It's either permanent accommodation or it's visitor accommodation, and the 3 months and the 12-month period, as we heard from the planners earlier on, is in the scheme.
If.
So wouldn't that be the determination by any sort of adjudicator to say, well, you saying that they're staying there permanently, well, let's go back to this. This is what it says. Anything longer than 3 months is considered permanent.
Well, we're going to discuss this back and forth all the time. Mover and seconder, what do you say to the matter so far as Clause 5 condition is concerned?
I'd leave clause 5 as it is. I'd prefer to, and I'd prefer to take that to vote. Thank you.
As the seconder, Mayor, I'd be happy to go to vote with that if we had the word consecutive after 3. Which I think James was
Mover, do you
considering.
happy to put consecutive in there or not?
Once again, I'd defer to the planners to ask whether or not they consider that workable. Sorry, planners.
Mr Barnard, is it workable?
That needs to be the original motion.
It's,
The valid points that have all been raised, and it's, it can be difficult to come up with conditions on the run. It is a different application to what we would normally receive for visit accommodation. It is specifically designed, proposed for visitor accommodation. I don't think it's unreasonable to put a time frame in there, and I appreciate the concerns. It is a problem that if you put consecutive days, they can leave it for a month and they come, a day and they come back again. The development itself would have to change considerably for that sort of thing to occur. The proposal of what we've got before us,
If it was weeks, I'd agree with you. If it's
14
months, I don't.
single bedroom units, buildings in units in a highly sought after area. It's not something that's going to suddenly become affordable housing or.
yeah, true, but this is a question of fact. Is it
So
the question exceeding? Councillor Breeny asked the question, I passed it on to you. So, Councillor Breeny, you want to say something again now?
I understand the planner's concern, and I stick to my statement in relation to leaving the condition as it is. I'd prefer to go to vote.
Well, seconder, what do you say?
Yes, I'll go along with that.
Right. All those in favour of the proposal and conditions? Against? I declare it carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Now, if we get, I think that's the last of the planning matters. Can I have a motion that council no longer acts as a planning authority? No, I did. Councillor Browning, thank you.
I move that council no longer acts as a planning authority at 3:06 PM.
I have a seconder. Thank you, thank you, Deputy Mayor. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Planners, thank you very much for coming and putting up with any of it.
It won't always be this
Absolutely.
Next item is financial report, sorry.
Sorry, councillor, just before we go on with, just in the planner's defence, they didn't write this report. We had an external planner write it. So, they've been literally thrown in the deep end, but this is why we now have the capacity to do this ourselves and not have someone based up in Queensland do a report and be cognizant of penguins. I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that. Now, item 5 on page 35 of the agenda, financial reports. Do I have a motion? Councillor Churchill, thank you.
I move that council receives and notes the financial reports as attached to this report for the period ended 31st of December 2020.
I have a seconder. Councillor Arnold. Is there any discussion? Councillor Churchill.
Just wanted to say that I've been through these in pretty fair detail, and I don't see any deficiencies or any issues that come to mind. The only one that I do have a bit of trouble with is reading the budget capital works detail. I think that's a function of age.
You mean on page 40
Yes.
and 41?
Yes,
I've got a magnifying glass, but it's still fuzzy.
I do too. But you can go back to the screen.
Any other council, something to say? Councillor Robinson looked a bit pregnant.
No, it's just, It's news to me.
General Manager.
It's just that it's blurry. Yeah, those last couple of pages are, and I can usually read them.
To you, Mr Mayor, there's no intent there. I think it's a technical glitch. But just getting back to a question that Councillor Churchill did raise at the last meeting, and that was around the PROSA raw water scheme income. There has been money received, and in the actual statement, have you received, you should have received the statement in your information briefing. Did you, it looks something like, it looks like this.
I haven't got a briefing yet.
No, well, sorry,
like
we're
that,
still doing the November, December, it's November, December we're doing now. Is that okay? So, sorry, so that'll be in the November, December information briefing document, which clearly outlines what we received to date, and what we're expecting to receive.
Could you remind us again, please, General Manager?
So last year, up until the end of last year, there was, we'd invoiced $84,000, which had been received, had been paid. This year, as you will see in the profit and loss statement, which you receive shortly, 60,000. There is still 16,000 owing, which is due at the end of this month.
Any questions coming out of that?
The only question I have through you, Mayor, is that I asked this question last time. Will it be reflected in that line item eventually?
It will be. It is reflected in the user charges, but I take your point, Councillor, that you can't, it's not easy to separate that out. You will see it, when you get the statement, you will see it quite
Yeah.
clearly.
I'm just thinking from a public point of view, who people might be listening to this meeting and just wonder why it's not there.
It is I'm saying,
I
when
know
you get
what
the
you mean,
statement,
but
you'll
it's
see it
not on that
reflected.
line item which says PROSA Plains Raw Water Scheme.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I put the motion. All those in favour? Against? I declare it carried. Next item is section 24, committees, item 6, on page 43. There's no report on that, so we'll pass on from that. Item 7, officers' reports requiring a decision. Councillor Woods.
I'll move that council adopts the asset management plan hydraulic infrastructure and recognises this as a key document in achieving sustainable management of council's asset. Once adopted, the plans will be published on council's website.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Browning, thank you. Does anyone wish, or do you wish to speak to the matter?
Yes, if
Yeah,
I may,
please,
just
Deputy
briefly, Mayor and councillors, I'd just like to acknowledge the work that's done on this report with regards to the author, sorry, yes. Vince Butler, that's right. And the excellent work that he's done to come up with this this asset management plan, and yeah, that's basically all I want to say.
Any other? Yes, Councillor Brennan. Oh, look, Councillor Browning.
Through the mayor, I
Yes.
just, I think it's easy to read, and I'd like to just reiterate what Deputy Mayor Wood said. So.
Councillor Brennan.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I also reiterate, I thank Mr Butler for his diligence. And just to note that it was part of a very detailed workshop with all councillors, and I must say it was a sobering document. That council has a responsibility in relation to hydraulic infrastructure that places us in a financial situation where diligence is going to be the byword, and the future expenditure on stormwater infrastructure and things like the PROSA Plains Raw Water Scheme, which, by the way, constitutes half of our asset management costs, is a sobering thought, as I said, and I commend the councillors for getting this asset management plan through and up and running, and thank the General Manager for his assistance in getting that done as well. Thank you.
Any other matters to be said? And if that's the case, I put the motion. All those in favour? Against? I declare the motion carried unanimously. Next item is on page 46, related party disclosures. Can I have a motion? Councillor Bruni?
Thank you, Mayor. I move that Council adopt the related party disclosures policy as attached to this report effective 19th January 2021.
Can I have a seconder? Councillor Churchill. Councillor Bruni, do you wish to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Mayor. An essential document, as obviously it's a requirement for us to ensure that we disclose all our relationships in relation to any dealings with council. I must say, though, that I find the document to be a bit of a challenge, and I would hope that council, any person, councillors, etc., officers who are required to fill out the form, be given every assistance by management to do so. Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Churchill, do you wish to say anything?
Councillor Bruni
Any other
has
comment?
represented well.
If that's the case, I put the motion. All those in favour? Against? I declare the motion carried unanimously. There are no motions, notices of motion. Item 8. Item 9, there are no petitions. There are questions. Item 10, questions without notice from councillors, and there are responses from the General Manager printed in the notice of meeting and agenda. I don't think we require a motion, we just note these. Councillor
I have a question
Woods,
without
yes.
notice. Yes.
please. Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Thank you, Mayor. I have three, if I may, with the indulgence of council. My first question is through you to the General Manager. And as we've all received correspondence via email regards the Tribunna District School crossing, there was a motion put and carried back on the 28th of January 2020. Did you want me to read it so it reminds you all what it is?
Yes, please.
Sorry?
If
I
you
haven't
like.
received
Yeah.
it, so yeah.
So the motion that was moved and carried on the 28th of January 2020 is one, that council employs a suitably qualified person to assess both Melbourne Street and Vickery Street Tribunna School crossing to determine their compliance with the current Australian standards for school crossings, and 2, that in the event that either or both crossings are assessed as deficient, council takes steps to immediately rectify the deficiencies to ensure the safety of students at Tribunna School. And the motion was put and carried 4-2. So my question through you, Mayor, to the General Manager is, where is council at with this particular motion?
Can I interrupt you for a minute? You've got that printed out. Could you give that
Yes,
to
I
the
will.
Minutes Secretary?
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
So through you, Mr Mayor, the work is underway to assess those crossings. That previous motion was being dealt with by our previous works manager, who's since departed, as you're aware. So work is currently underway with our new director, who I'm hoping to introduce council to shortly, and our new works manager, who will be introduced to you shortly as well. I know they've met Deputy Mayor and the Mayor, but it'll be a good opportunity. So, who both have experience in this area to actually assess and ensure that we, at the very least, comply with the standards. There's a challenge there with driveways, private property driveways. I haven't got the history as to how those driveways, or even if those driveways went through a council approval process. I'm not even in a position to start investigating that, because I don't think I'll come up with anything. They are old driveways. They've been there for a long time. But something may have to change in that regard if we're going to put in a pedestrian crossing that meets the Australian standards.
Okay,
Which will mean some liaison with the property owner, obviously.
thank you. Thank you, General Manager. I won't bother asking the second part of that question.
Who, sorry, I may just add, does happen to be an ex-member of staff.
Yes. There's two more questions, if I may. Mayor,
The first question you have,
that goes
Brenton.
through to...
Thank you very much.
And I'll give the second to Miss Murray as well.
Thank you.
There was supposed to be a report on the course of action with regards to the Prosser River Mouth Advisory Group in the December agenda. Are you able to advise when we can expect this report?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I did send an email to councillors in regards to that, to say that it's gonna be later on this year. I can't put a time frame on it yet. I have not convened the Prosser River Advisory Group yet, or got around to doing that yet. I am mindful of the need to finalise the three lease arrangements. Whether that happens with the group or outside of the group, they're involved anyway, but that needs to progress first. But I haven't managed to convene, I haven't even got around to convening that group yet, so I suspect it's going to be later this year, but I can't put a time frame on it.
Thank you. And my last question is, when will the public be able to attend council meetings with regards to COVID?
Thank you, through the Mayor again. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'll take on board advice from our Risk Management Officer in that regard. I think there may be opportunity for us to have limited access in this room, pretty much like we had with our own officers here, and there'd obviously have to be the controls for people coming in. But I'll take advice from our Risk Management Officer who developed Council's COVID plans, both the community and the Council COVID plan, as to how we can move forward on that basis. I doubt very much at this point in time that we'll be able to go back to the original full unimpeded access. So there may be an opportunity to have limited amount of public in here. How we work that and how we allow people in, maybe that could be people that made submissions or people pertinent to a particular report that are allowed in any particular meeting. I'll have to think about how we do that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other? Thank you, Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is in relation to the Performance Improvement Direction. The Performance Improvement Direction was issued under Part 12B, Section 214M of the Local Government Act, following a council in confidence letter from the Minister advising of his intention to issue it. We've been reporting on timelines for the Performance Improvement Direction and outcomes, which is great. We're complying with everything. But that reporting's now created some interest in the community as to what the Performance Improvement Direction actually consists of. So my question is there any reason why the Performance Improvement Direction in its entirety should not be publicly released?
I'd ask that the General Manager consider his answer to the question and raise it at a later date to Council.
Don't have a problem with that. And Ms Murray, I will send you the wording.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to have an in-confidence discussion with Council about that as well, if I can,
Yes.
after the meeting.
Now, there's nothing else in the agenda apart from the question of closure. And I have a motion about closure. Do I require a motion?
You don't need a motion.
Well, I declare that the meeting of 19 January 2021 is closed at 3, I suppose...
23.
23, or that'll do. 3:23. That's the end of the meeting. And
Thank you, councillors.
Thank you.
the